When I think about the origin of a language, I think about how influential and powerful sound is. Out of all the five senses, to me, sound is the most persuasive. When I think of primitive times, yes, it mattered what you saw, what you smelled, what you tasted, what you felt, but the ability to put together a string of sounds that could invoke action or inaction in others, change behavior through its myriad of combinations, and quite literally be the difference between life and death, put sound in its own category. It's amazing to see how sound has evolved into words that are influenced by culture, politics, the economy, the internet, even weather. Because, yes, I don't know if it's just me, but I don't think Russia would sound like that if they saw more sun. I think it'd be a little bit more suave, a little bit more smooth if they got a little bit more sun over there. I'm just saying. I once read that we should learn languages because languages are the only thing worth knowing, even poorly. I find this true. For example, when learning an instrument, at the beginning stages or the early stages, what you are inputting is oftentimes more than the utility that you're getting out of it. But with learning a language, even the most amateur knowledge is useful. Knowing a few common phrases, sayings, or greetings can make a wealth of difference, especially when you're talking to someone whose native language it is that you're speaking. And influences, if you're in that Spanish or Spanish speaking country, if you're in that country where that language is spoken, it can make a tremendous difference in your experience if you're able to get around with a few phrases in your back pocket. I visited Poland last year, and when I got there, I really wasn't focused on learning the language, which I usually am, but this time I really wasn't focused on it, so I didn't even look up how to say hello. And I would be going to the library and the cafes and the coffee shops and all these places, and people would be like, Dzień dobry, and I'd respond, hello. And it would make me feel so cringe. Like the first time it happened, it made me feel so cringe. I was like, okay, girl, you gotta at least learn how to say hello. So I learned how to say hello. I learned how to say thank you, and even that just made like a little difference in my experience there. It's like, okay, you at least learned how to say hello. You're not responding in freaking English, expecting me to speak English, you know. So that just goes to show, like with language, even being a beginner is beneficial. I study language because you get to see the world through a different lens. Before learning Spanish, I would hear people speaking, and naively, I couldn't even imagine what they were saying. As my listening skills improved and I was able to eavesdrop a little more easily, I realized people are talking about the same things. They're having the same types of conversations that I'm having in English. Who would have thought? They're making the same jokes with their friends that I make. They're talking about movies, family, sports, whatever happened to them that day. Before, it was such a mystery to me, I guess because it just sounded so different, but people are just people at the end of the day. We're more alike than we are different. Knowing another language also allows you to learn from the horse's mouth, particularly with the history of a country or a historical event. The native account is likely to differ a lot from the one that's translated. So it's beneficial to know, to be able to hear from the actual people that went through things, or the actual people that, but because like some words And some words don't even exist in other languages, so you may have. So a lot of things are just lost in translation, of course. And it says a lot about a culture on the feelings that they choose to define. For example, there are lots of words in Japanese that only exist in Japanese, but the feeling of those words or the idea behind those words, probably a lot of people outside of Japan can relate to. Sundoku is a word for when you buy more books and you already have a bunch of them in your possession that you haven't read, but you buy some more. I know I do that. I got some on the way right now. And I got some over there that I haven't read. Yugen is this profound awareness of the universe that provokes this emotion that is just too deep for words. And I know there are people out there that have felt that. As a writer, I feel that. I feel that a lot. I feel things just a little bit too much sometimes. But yeah, overall, I study language because I have this burning desire to connect with people. It's an expression of love, taking the time to communicate with someone in a language that is not your own is an act of love. Taking the time to learn a language to be able to communicate with someone is an act of love. So many things are lost in translation: subtleties, nuances, jokes, even sarcasm. If I can reduce that gap and understand the world around me a little more, I'm gonna do that. Which is why when the creature in Frankenstein first began his language learning journey, he knew that learning the language would allow him to understand the world that he was dumped into more. Frankenstein is one of my favorite spooky season reads, and honestly maybe like a top 10 book of all time for me. Like it's that just like classic. Like it's the epitome of a classic to me. I reread it for the first time in a minute last year. I remember reading towards the climax of the novel where the creature is sheltering itself in this small hovel adjacent to the cottage where two siblings and their father are living. As he learns about the world through his senses, he also observes the family. And through his observations, he learns language. And I thought many of the ways he learns language are relevant to the way someone would learn language in the real world. So I want to share some tips I gathered. Don't know why I just winked. The creature first observed the mannerisms and actions of the cottagers. When they worked, when they wept, when the two cottagers would seem to express joy, when the younger cottagers would exhibit kindness towards their elder blind father. He took note of body language and facial expressions and how emotion shows up in movements. When you're first learning a new language, focus on hearing the accents as much as possible. Learning to separate the words when they're being said, even if you don't understand what they mean yet. Pay attention to what syllables are elongated, what emphasis are placed on certain letters. You can do all of this just by sitting back, observing, listening. When it comes to babies, this is what they do. It's called imitation learning, which is simply just imitating what you hear and see. When they hear a word repeatedly, they then try and say it back. There's trial and error when it comes to building language from inference, of course. A child may take heavy to mean hard to carry, so they have like this light water bottle, and it's hard for them to carry, so they think it's heavy. As time goes on, though, these sort of mistakes or misconceptions naturally correct themselves. Toddlers are not going to school and learning grammar rules. They're simply imitating the world around them. And that's what the creature in Frankenstein did as well. One reason it's difficult for adults to learn a new language is because they already have a native one. When you're already fluent in one language, it's natural to try and directly translate everything word for word into your native tongue. However, this is not a good long-term solution because Sometimes things have no direct translation or don't make sense in through the direct translation. A really common example is mucho gusto in español. Mucho gusto in English directly translates to much pleasure, but the meaning behind the phrase is actually nice to meet you. That's why it's important to relate words to ideas and not direct translations. In Frankenstein, the creature found this way of learning pretty difficult at first. The family spoke really quickly and he was unable to reproduce some of the sounds. He found it difficult to relate objects to the words that they referred to. He discovered that names were given to certain words like fire, milk, bread, and wood. The objects he was familiar with are what he learned first. He learned the ideas appropriate to these sounds, not what they were directly translated to, because he himself had no first language. He had no concept of a first language. So imagine you are learning a language as your first language and you have nothing to compare it to in terms of a native tongue. Just like in English, how there are multiple ways to get an idea across, the same is true in other languages. So just relate ideas to words, not direct translations. Even when the creature didn't know what words meant, he still found value in being able to distinguish them. He studied the cottager's body language when certain words were used, such as good or earnest or unhappy. He distinguished tone of voice and noticed the harshness or gentleness or cheerfulness of certain words. He observed that when he would do tasks for the cottagers, they would mutter things like good spirit or wonderful. So he learned to associate these words with positivity. And if he's learning this way, for example, if one day someone does something good for him, he will describe it as wonderful, even without knowing the direct translation. As time went on, the creature in Frankenstein would listen to Felix, one of the siblings, read to his sister Agatha and his elder father. The creature was puzzled at first, but he discovered that some of the sounds being used when Felix read were the same sounds being used when he spoke. Not knowing the concept of reading yet, the creature put two and two together. He realized that on the paper there were signs for speech that could be understood. The creature applied his whole mind to learning this endeavor because he knew that if he ever wanted to leave that little hut that he was in, he had to know how to talk to these people, or else they were gonna freak out. He knew he had to know how to speak. He had to know their language in order to approach them. This reminds me of a quote that's something like, "One who knows languages unlocks a key to the world." The creature in Frankenstein learned language by observing the lessons that Felix gave to the Arabian Safi. He began to understand most of the words they said. Sorry, y'all, I'm sitting on the floor and I just gotta keep moving because, ooh, it's not comfy. I don't know why I decided to record this long ass video here. But the creature learned the science of letters as they were taught to the Arabian woman that came on horseback. And this unlocked a new depth of learning for him. He listened to Felix read the book Ruin of Empires to Safi, and he listened to the explanations that Felix gave while he was reading. Through this book, the creature learned about history and empire and manner, governments, religions, and systems of human society. He studied and practiced, and ultimately, his English became better than mine. The parts of Frankenstein where the creature is recounting his journey, telling his story, or relaying his feelings to Frankenstein are my absolute favorite parts of the story. They're my favorite because he's just so eloquent in his word choice. The way he speaks is so emotionally provocative, full of passion and reverence. I underlined so much in this book. It is truly for me the epitome of a classic. I've been actively learning Spanish for over 2 years now, and my skills have ebbed and flowed. When I was living in a Spanish speaking country, my speaking skills were at their best. Now, being back in Atlanta, my speaking skills have waned, but my listening and reading skills, I say, have improved. Now that I've actually started taking Spanish classes again, my approach to learning has changed. I've learned a lot of lessons in these last few years, so I feel now I'm taking an approach that works best for me. So here's what I do if my goal was to learn a language in 2026. Keep in mind these tips are for someone that I'm assuming already knows a few basic words, grammar rules, the basics of conjugating, the rules that are appropriate for your level. If you are starting from scratch, I would recommend finding a resource such as a teacher or a native Spanish speaker or a advanced student, someone that can provide guidance to you specifically on what to work on. There are two categories of skills for language learning. Primary skills consist of sound, vocabulary, and grammar. Sub skills consist of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. The better you know your primary skills, the easier it is to use them when producing a sub skill. For the rest of the video, I'll be talking mainly about sub skill practices because this video is about tidbits from Frankenstein, and the creature there used a combination of primary and sub skills in his language learning journey. These tips are more around simulating an immersive Spanish environment for yourself and increasing your input and output the way I do it and the way that the creature in Frankenstein did it. If you want more cohesive advice on language learning, I will leave below some of my favorite channels that I think can give you more of an overarching view of the many tips that come along with language learning. But this video is already long, so I'm just gonna speed through this. I'm just gonna zoom through it. Zoom. Approach language learning as if you are 2 years old, okay? I think the main reason that a lot of adults give up on language learning is because of shame. Things will get hard. There will come a moment where you feel like you're plateauing. That does not mean that you are not fit to learn a language. Adults don't want to be beginners. They don't want to be embarrassed for saying something wrong or using the wrong phrase or not understanding when someone's speaking to them. They don't want the feelings that come along with those experiences. This is the number one reason, guys. This is the number one reason that people quit. And I know because I have been there. A few months into when I was really learning Spanish, I wanted to give up just after a few months. I said to myself, I'll never learn this language. I ain't ever gonna understand what these folks saying to me. I was in the trough of sorrow. But because I know that this stage happens when anyone is learning any new skill, I persevered. I rebuked those negative thoughts. I kept learning, I kept studying, and I woke up one day having full conversations with native Spanish speakers without translating in my head at first. Like, how did we get here? I'm thinking in Spanish, I'm dreaming in Spanish. Who is this girl? You have to keep going. Things will get frustrating. You have to keep going. You have to keep moving and not dwell on your mistakes. And anyone who makes you feel ashamed for saying something wrong or the accent that you have can kick rocks. They probably don't read or haven't learned anything new in the past 20 years, and that's facts. No shade. So for reading, go to the library. They need your support, especially if you're in America. Grab a handful of children books, ages 3 to 5 in Spanish, or whatever language you're learning, and read them. Just zoom through them. You come across a word that you don't know, pen to paper, write it down. As you get more confident, start incorporating other media like articles, blogs, more chapter books. Work on learning the most common 1,000 words. Your vocabulary will improve astronomically. Put your devices in Spanish too. That'll force you to learn some things. When it comes to writing, start with just writing 3 to 5 sentences every day in your journal, just about your day. If you come across a word that you want to write but you don't know, just look it up. And that's your new word for the day, you know? Writing is a form of active learning. You're actively recalling information from your brain and outputting it on the paper. This will help you when you're trying to speak and trying to reach the point where you're not always translating in your head before you speak. Journaling is a daily routine for me these days. And even though I don't write my entire entries in Spanish, just writing the first few sentences in Spanish has me learning new words that I definitely didn't know, but are definitely a part of my everyday speaking in English. So, listening. Besides eavesdropping on conversations when I can, how I create an immersive environment for myself listening wise is I watch a lot of shows and movies in Spanish. Particularly anime is my favorite thing to watch. Shout out Death Note. If you haven't seen that Spanish version, go check that out. It's fire. Fire. But same with reading. Start with children's shows. They're saying really basic things in those shows, guys. They're not they ain't writing, they ain't talking about dissertations. They ain't having college lectures in Spanish on children's shows. So start from the beginning. Make it easy for yourself. I just finished Avatar: The Last Airbender in Spanish. It was pretty great as well. Like I mentioned before, like the creature in Frankenstein would notice like when the cottagers sounded more melancholy and when they sounded happier and all of these things. And I think when you're are practicing listening, it's important to notice the different inflections of the way words are being said, because a lot of these voice actors are native speakers as well, and they're putting the emphasis on certain words the way a native speaker would. So as you're listening, repeat the word back, as they said it. This will help you to sound more native when you're speaking. And when you're learning, it's important to choose an accent that you can understand. I personally like watching content, whether it's YouTube, Reels, podcasts from creators from Colombia and Equatorial Guinea. And also when you're consuming content and come across a word or phrase that you think you will use or you use already in your daily life in your own language, write it down. Write it down, because the easiest way to learn a new word or phrase is to use it as soon as you learn it. So write it down. Then the next time you're having a conversation with someone in Spanish, as soon as possible, use that word that you just learned. Drill this into your head. You will never speak Spanish if you don't practice speaking Spanish. Okay, that was really Spanish specific, but it applies to any language. If you do not practice speaking that language, you will never speak that language. You have to speak. You have to speak. You have to speak. It don't matter how much reading you do, how much shows you watch, how much writing you do. If you're not speaking, you will never speak. It will never happen if you don't learn some bravery. Let go of your feelings of sounding silly and open that mouth. Open that mouth. And speak. We want to hear you. We want to hear you. Some easy ways to get accustomed to speaking is to just take a class. Depending on your location, these can be easier and harder to find, but there are also many options online. Ooh, that kind of scared me. That kind of scared. That kind of scared. It's giving Frankenstein. Oh, it's giving. Ooh, that's kind of scary. Let me put that down. And you don't have to sign up for a whole semester or 1,000 hours. Being in the class kind of gets rid of that judgment that some people feel, because you're in a class, you're there to learn, right? Your teacher knows your levels and your limitations, so you feel more comfortable making mistakes in front of them. And they correct your mistakes in a way that's helpful. But you have to realize that learning the language isn't about saying things perfectly. It's about being able to convey a message to someone in a way that they can understand. In English, for example, maybe if someone approaches me or I approach them and they tell me, I know speak English, I'm not going to be like, honey, it's It's I don't speak English. I'm not gonna say that. I know what she meant, or I know what he meant, or I know what they meant. As long as I understand what they were trying to say, it really doesn't matter that they didn't say it in the grammatically correct way. You know what I mean? The same is true. Let go of that when you're trying to learn. Let go of perfection when you're trying to learn a language. Also, language exchanges are my favorite way of practicing speaking personally. They're usually free events where you can meet up with other language learners. In my experience, at a restaurant or a school, and it can be focused on one language or a variety of languages. You go there, you sit, you have conversations with people that are trying to, for example, learn Spanish, or people that are trying to learn English. You all just have conversations back and forth and help each other out. When I was first learning Spanish in Colombia, I was very shy about going to them. My first one, I think I went to, the only thing I said was my introduction. I just introduced myself and I didn't speak anymore the entire time. But people were super nice. And it's a great environment to be in because you're around other people that understand the process of learning a new language, especially as an adult. They know what it takes to learn a new language and how you have to get over that hump of feeling embarrassed to speak. So they're patient and they're super encouraging. And if I didn't understand how to say something, they would just help me out in the way that a teacher would because they get it. They just fucking get it. And I would help them with their English as well. And in Colombia, the ones I went to, the exchanges I went to were full of dancing and drinks and just having a good ass time with each other. I made great friends, and it's honestly my favorite way of finding community in a new city that I'm going to, especially one that has a different native language. I will just sign up for a language exchange, find one as soon as possible, and just go there. And then I meet people that are trying to learn my language, or are learning my language, or speaking my language, and also folks that could help me learn the language of that country. It's just like the perfect place to go. I love language exchanges. In Atlanta, it's a bit harder for me to find them. A lot of them are out the way, so I go to them when I can, but I take classes, like I said, and that's where I get a lot of my speaking practice these days. And I be talking to myself too sometimes. I will talk to myself in my apartment just like I do in English. I'll talk to myself in Spanish I will like create these scenarios in my head where I'm like, okay, how would I approach this situation? What would I say? And I say it in Spanish. Um, gotta do what you gotta do. Gotta get it how you live. I saw someone on the internet, this guy, he's in a Spanish speaking country, and I think I want to do this the next time I go to one. He would just walk up to people and be like, Disculpa, estoy aprendiendo español. ¿Quieres tener una conversación para 5 minutos conmigo? It's that simple. And they would have like a conversation for 5 minutes, just talking about whatever. And he would get like his speaking practice that day. And he would speak like with natives that like lived there. And it was just a great practice. And I want to try that too. I also use Uber a lot, and in my neighborhood, at least, a lot of them, the Uber drivers are immigrants from Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, and all these amazing Latin countries. And whenever I hop in one and I see like the map is in Spanish, I'm like, ah, yeah. ¿De dónde eres? And they're like, hablas español. And I'm like, yeah, estoy aprendiendo, así que hablarme despacio, porfa. And we chop it up for like the 20-minute ride, and it's really nice. They get really excited that I speak Spanish. And yeah, it's just a little taste of what I miss the most, not being in America. But yeah, even saying like things like hola or buen día, acá está bien, ¿cómo va? These little things can make someone's day, trust me. So yeah, again, it's great to be a beginner and just use what you got. Overall, you are a baby in the language if you're just starting out. So just remember that. Don't be trying to speak like someone with a PhD in classical Latin American literature. To close things out, the future of language learning intrigues me a little bit. In internet culture, it seems like new slang words appear and disappear every day. and it spreads more rapidly as well because information spreads more rapidly. I think about how African American vernacular English, Ebonics, ballroom culture, and phrases are appropriated around the world, but also how like large language models interpret these inputs that they get from our culture. On one hand, I want to gatekeep my culture, but then I think if these tools are truly gonna be so ingrained in our lives, like people are saying they will be, is it best to feed it our culture so that it understands us a little bit more? It's hard to decide when the appropriation of our culture can literally lead to our detriment and more harm in our community. So that's something I just grapple with. I also think about languages evolution under surveillance with all these devices listening to us, watching us, and as we get more and more into a world where you don't have control over if you're being recorded. Quick tangent, if you wear those Ray-Ban Meta glasses, you a cop. You a cop. If you recording people out there with them glasses on, you a cop. Let me see what them glasses. I'm slapping them off your goddamn face. For real though, put that shit down. But what does this all mean for how quickly language will change? I think about code words and slang and just being in this constant evolution of creating new words and switching words in order to derail the enemy or to only be understood by a few. I anticipate body language and sign language to evolve in this way as well, with verbal language so easily understandable, at least generally speaking. Very generally speaking, like if you're, in, a place where people, like if we both know English, it's easier for me to like decipher if you're trying to like say things in a way that's different. You know what I mean? I'm saying I believe that sign language and body language will ultimately will evolve into this appendage of privacy. They have these devices now for live translation. And I'm sure in some contexts it's extremely useful, of course. Like imagine you're in the emergency room and you get a patient that doesn't speak your language and you have like some glasses that live are translating what they're saying to you back into your ear. I mean, this is a life or death situation. Imagine you get pulled over by a cop and, y'all don't speak the same language as well. That's a life or death situation. Of course, I understand that use case. I just don't really want it to become something that's used recreationally. There's an art that comes with learning a new language. Not only have I challenged my own brain in ways it hasn't been challenged before, but I've learned discipline from sticking to it. I've learned bravery and courage from putting myself out there and being willing to sound silly or make a mistake. I've learned I've learned to appreciate a culture through the lens of how they express ideas instead of trying to understand their way of life through my worldview. And throughout this entire process, I've spread love. I've spread love, corny as it sounds. I've spread love through my efforts to try and connect with people through language. Language learning is so much more than trying to understand what the other person is saying. So, with all the convenience still being thrown at us, I hope that we all still continue to study languages. Thanks for watching.